to another Legends of Runeterra podcast. This is Conan's son, and I'm joined by two guests once more. First of all, we have Wick, who's now like my co-host, my regular. Welcome, Wick, once more.
Hey guys, it's Wick, just an average Legends of Runeterra enjoyer and esports enthusiast. Happy to be here once again.
And once again, we have a very famous, prominent guest from the community. We have one of the writers of Mastering Runeterra, and it's the MonteXristo. How do you even pronounce it? MonteXristo? Or
You flatter me, Conan. Famous cheese. I guess at this point, maybe a little bit. What's up, guys? Those of you who don't know me, I write, I cast, and I kind of play for Mastering Runeterra as part of the Squadcast. I have that podcast as well. Shameless self-plug. But I also play for the Wobbly Wombats in the Aegis League. So tune into that maybe to show your support there. I am a bit of a tournament grinder and looking forward to joining you guys today.
Oh, yeah. Shout out to the Wombats and Aegis League, for sure.
Totally check them out. Very cool. Okay, today we want to talk about the upcoming seasonals and the lineups, basically. We want to start with how to build a lineup. Then we want to talk about targeting stuff in the meta. And lastly, about how you can effectively prepare with like scrims and similar stuff. And yeah, we already pulled up the tournament lineup thing from May 5th. Would you say there are any major changes to this, Monte, or would you still say this is a good article?
So Tournament and I are planning to put out another article for either late tomorrow or early Thursday if we can. There are going to be a couple slight changes. Nothing too drastic, but we're going to trim down on the articles and just make sure that we have exactly the lineup. If you look a little bit further down in this article, the very first lineup that we have here is in my opinion, probably the best type A lineup. It's Pantheon, it's MonteXristo, and it's Talia Ziggs. These three decks are at the top of the metagame undisputably. They are three good decks. They draw good matchup tables pretty much across the board and don't really have a ton of weaknesses. So this is probably the kind of lineup that I would recommend most. I would put at the top of my recommendations list going into the seasonals tournament. You just want to be able to get good matchups all the way through all the way through those 9 rounds.
Yeah, I think this lineup looks super solid. I think especially with the new playcast changes, we did see that Faded got quite a bit of a buff. I do think that the balance changes kind of left MonteXristo still pretty good. I feel like it's very dominating still, very much so. And I'm sure you're very excited about Talia Ziggs being, the powerhouse that it's kind of turned into over the last couple weeks.
Yeah, it's definitely a really strong deck and one that I'm happy to be able to include in my lineup articles here. I'm super high on it, as you pointed out, Wick.
Yeah. So when you first begin kind of deciding on what 3 decks to bring, what sort of questions are you looking to ask? Especially, starting with like even your first deck, like what are the most important factors picking the 3 decks that you're deciding to bring?
There's a couple different approaches you can take in a tournament when you're trying to build a lineup, right? You can just play 3 good decks like we have here in front of us. You want to base this style of lineup around the top decks in the metagame, and you want to hope that these draw roughly 50-50 matchup spreads across the board at worst, right? You want better than 50-50 or 50-50 at worst if you can. You don't want these to be super targetable if you can avoid it. Obviously, that's not always going to be possible, but in the case here, we are weak to aggro. Yeah, that's a bit of a struggle, right? But most people aren't going to be on triple aggro this time around, I don't think. And we absolutely smash most other matches. Control gets obliterated by this lineup. You can outscale all the other mid-range decks. You're not too worried about Demacia because you have bigger Demacia in your deck, as well as you have stuns, and you can leverage tempo swings that way with your Ziggs Talia. And of course, Zerath's MonteXristo is just going to be able to achieve that Sun Disc flip, and then become an uncontestable late game monster of a deck. So what you really want to be doing with this style of lineup is you want to pick decks that are strong. You want to pick decks that have one common weakness, so that way you can ban out that weakness or hope you dodge it. If you queue it to somebody playing triple aggro, you're going to be a little bit sad, but there is still room to outskill them with these decks. You can come out ahead with the Pantheon list. You can come out ahead with the Mono-Shurima list. You have to play a little bit counterintuitively, sometimes blowing up your own disc to get a 5/4, using Rite of the Arcane that way to not be able to not have to sacrifice a mana gem. And even with Ziggs Talia, you can do it as well. Like, it's hard, but you can win the aggro matchups if you're teched properly and you know them in and out.
Mm-hmm.
The other way you can approach it is you can try and counter what you perceive the best lineup to be, which if we go down to the next lineup in this article, it is the triple aggro lineup. Now, here, Nightfall is in here because it's a pet deck of mine. I don't actually think it does a very good job of beating Pantheon. It can beat Pantheon, and it can beat Sundisk, but it struggles a little bit. However, the other two decks in this lineup are super, super good into most of the metagame. Pirates smashes Sundisk, smashes Pantheon, right? This is a very swarmy board style deck where we get on the board early and then we just transition into burn in the late game. And that means that we're going to try and push all of our base damage and get them to about 10 HP. 7 to 10 HP within the first 3 or 4 turns of the game. At that point, we're transitioning into a stall game plan where we just want to draw into our Decimates, into our Sigils, into our Noxian Fervors, and be able to push out that way. Some of these lists have transitioned into 3TF because it's a bit more of a versatile card. I personally still like the one of Gangplank. I think that it is there just as another endgame burn card, in my opinion. And then the last deck that we have in this one is Draven Scion. This is a very burn-heavy Draven Scion list with 3 Fervors, 3 Mystic Shots, 3 Decimates. Like, this is all in on killing your opponent. This one might be a little bit heavy. I might have to tweak this list a little bit for my recommendations in this week, but you can keep an eye out for that article. Again, same thing. You're getting on the board early with your fearsome units, with your Reborn Grenadiers coming out at burst speed, with your Poros if you really need to be able to push some to chip elusive damage a turn. It adds up, right? And then you get to that turn 5, 6, 7 point, and you've lost the board. You're right. You can't keep up the pressure that way. They're going to have stabilize. So you either have Scion, which a lot of decks can't deal with, or in the case that you don't have Scion, you have Decimates, you have Fervors, you have Get Excited, you have Mystic Shot, and you're just going to be able to kill them that way. And then there's kind of the third way to approach the lineup. There's 4 ways really in my mind. You can play Comfort. You can just play 3 decks that use conflicting ban strategies. And what I mean by that is that one deck wants to ban control, one deck wants to ban aggro, one deck wants to ban combo.
Right.
As long as 2 of your 3 decks are on the same page, even then I would try and get all 3 of them to be on the same page, but just make sure that they're not too conflicting. You're okay because you're going to be able to outskill the matchups a lot of the time, right? It's better to play decks that you are super, super comfortable on and know your matchups better than your opponent. You're going to eke out more win percentage that way. Stats aren't the be-all, end-all of these things. And then the final way is to just play the counter to the counter lineup. Now, that strategy would be control in this meta, and actually Sir Turman did a wonderful job of highlighting a good example of that here. It's Feel the Rush. I believe Darkness is the next list here, and he's got Jace Sentinel control. So this is like a pretty standard anti-aggro lineup at the moment. Now, would I recommend doing this for your open rounds? Maybe if you're super comfortable on it. Maybe if this is your comfort lineup.
Yeah.
But for open rounds, the field is so wide. It's like you're playing on ladder, right? And when you're playing on ladder, you want decks that are powerful across the board, like we talked about earlier. You don't really want to be giving yourself major weaknesses. And these decks can certainly struggle into the top lineup, which is Pantheon, Sundisk, Ziggs Talia, right? So that's kind of my tips for building an effective best of 3 lineup and doing so in an environment like the seasonal open rounds.
Very interesting. Like, I also agree with you saying that you should pick up a comfort deck. Like, just trying to first time some deck in seasonals is probably not a good idea, because even if you hit the perfect lineup, perfect matchup, and you will still have to play a deck or win with a deck you have almost never practiced or don't really know too well, and will make some misplays, and the opponent, even if it's a bad matchup, will have already practiced it over and over and knows how to exploit those weaknesses way better. So I would appreciate your feedback on my approach, because I usually just go with what deck I played the most, what deck I know the best, and then try to build like the other two decks from that point. And for me, this was just Sentinels. I love Sentinels. I brought it to the last Seasonals, but it wasn't even that good. I wanted to bring it to this one as well. And then I was like, okay, this seems fine. But I didn't really, like looking at the matchup tables, I didn't really like the Darkness lineup that much.
It's too weak to Mono Shurima, I think.
I'll show you over here. Basically, the Jay Sentinels is very good against Pirate Aggro and against Caitlyn. The Tunde Metrandle, also good Pirate Aggro, Ezreal Caitlyn. Then if you go over here to Darkness, it just suddenly loses to Ezreal Caitlyn. Wait, that's...
Yeah. It does.
Down here. Loses to Ezreal Caitlyn, loses really hard to Sundisk, but you already played to ban Sundisk. So I was like, I should probably play a deck that's actually not losing to Ezreal Caitlyn if I want to have like these good matchups. And decided to bring Ezreal Heimerdinger instead because it also had like these good matchups. But I guess it's kind of not what you really should be doing. Just playing a different deck. It doesn't really fit the same ideas. What do you think on my change here?
So I have a couple points on that. One, Darkness itself, yes, the typical ladder standard list is bad into Ezreal Caitlyn, but I think if you put in some wall-ups and you just change up your list a little bit, you can do a lot better into it. So that comes down to teching your lineup effectively for what your expected meta and what your ban strategy is. One of the things that I did in the Aegis League with my team is we built a Darkness list that was completely focused on targeting Ziggs Talia. Crazy, right? That's like a terrible matchup for Darkness. It's never supposed to win that one. We just changed the list to the point where we absolutely teched it and Hydra actually respected our tech so much they banned it out in both our sets. Now that's a really, really small tournament. It's a really small tournament. We had our expected field. We had the read. We were able to make some really drastic tech choices. But the concept still stands, right? You can make a couple changes to your list, adding wall-ups, like I said, in the case of Darkness, to better your matchup into these bad matchups. You're not going to be able to shore it up completely every single time, but you can bring it from this 40% matchup to maybe a 45% matchup. And that's like a very winnable matchup percentage. Like, as I was saying earlier, if you know your decks and you're comfortable on them, you can absolutely smash quote unquote unfavored matchups all the time. If you know how to play that line for the 45%, way better than your opponent knows how to play the line for the 55%, they're going to make the mistakes. They're going to mulligan wrong. They're not going to have the cards they need, and they're going to lose. It's just how it works sometimes. The other thing, adding a deck like the Bandle City Ezreal Heimerdinger list, that's one deck that I'm still not sure about on a whole. I don't know how good this list actually is. I've seen it in the hands of Broken Ball, and it looks absolutely insane. And then I've seen it in the hands of somebody else, and it looks like a pile that does nothing. I've tried playing it. I can't make it work. And it looks like a deck that I would really enjoy. The other thing with that list in particular, it doesn't really fit with the game plan of your other two decks. It's kind of similar to Sentinels, but it's not like, it's more of a tempo aggro deck as opposed to a control deck, right? And maybe because of that, while it does draw the good matchup table into the Ezreal Caitlyn list that you're looking for, I think you're sacrificing points in other spots that maybe are more important. I don't know how popular Ezreal Caitlyn's actually going to be. It is a list that's stuck around for a very, very long time and that people seem to love, but I don't know that it's actually well positioned. And then the third point I had on all of this is that sometimes ladder stats are just skewed. Yeah. Sometimes ladder stats are just wrong, especially in the case of Darkness. Like, most good players know that Darkness isn't really a ladder deck right now. You just can't play it on the ladder. You're going to suffer way too much. So it's either players that are really, really try hard on the deck and that only play the deck that are playing it, or it's players that are looking to pick it up and experiment for a tournament lineup. And that kind of skews the stats a little bit. I typically use ladder stats as a rule of thumb, but I don't put too much stock in them. I use them as a guideline more than anything.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Do you also oftentimes feel that the typical lineups always follow the big, like, three archetypes? Let's say like there's like an all-in aggro lineup, a control lineup, and then there's like the mid-range / combo lineup. I had this experience for 2 seasons, or would you say that's also like a opportunity or a reason to bring like an aggro deck, a control deck, and a mid-range deck, for example?
I think you always want your lineups to have similar strategies. I've done stuff with like a control deck, and a tempo deck, right? I've done stuff like that, but typically you want your lineups to be on the same page. It gets really tricky if you go into a ban phase and you're like, shit, this deck wants to ban this deck wants to ban that deck, and this deck, well, it loses to all three of their decks. So what do you ban in that spot, right? You're then putting yourself into, and then you also have to predict what are they banning, because they have good matchups across the board sometimes. And you put yourself into a really awkward position where you're almost forced to 2-1 one specific deck. And then if you always want to be flipping a coin when you're queuing your first matchup. But if you flip that coin and you queue the wrong matchup and you get or you make a slight misplay and you let their deck that you're targeting through, you've lost, right? So you screwed yourself out of the win in deck selection at that point. And that's something that I did once and was like, I can never do this again. I think my lineup was Nightfall, Timo Ezreal Freljord, and Ash LeBlanc at the time. It was a nonsense lineup, but it was three decks that I liked at that point. And it was Threshnosis, I think. But anyways, the lineup didn't make sense on paper. It was really bad, and it struggled a lot. So I would advise that you do try and keep your decks on the same game plan.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the strategy that Conanson brought up, where you begin with a comfort pick and then you just try to find other decks that are similar and have the same tables. Because my first community tournament, I signed into OS with like standalone Fiora, Darrowing, and like spiders or something, just because, or not, it couldn't have been spiders, but it was like discard or something ridiculous, and got made fun of by my first round opponent. But I think, when you take into consideration the tables, it's really, like, at first these are very overwhelming to look at, right? But when you start taking it down to only looking at 2 or 3 decks at a time, I think it's really valuable to depend on these, just to help you get a sense of and a direction of where to go with your lineup.
Definitely. I think, I think the pick one deck that you're really comfortable on and then go from there is a really good way to start. You can also just pick the deck that is at the top of the metagame and go from there if you don't have like anything that you're particularly attached to. I know some players don't. I myself am currently considering Scion, Pantheon, and Fizz Nami. Why am I considering Fizz Nami? Well, because it's a deck that I'm super comfortable on and that I know I can win both the Scion and the Pantheon matchups in, and I can win the Sun Disc matchup as well. Especially since my opponents haven't played against that deck once this season at all, right? I topped OLS with a similar lineup a while ago. I think I played Echo Zillion, Talia Ziggs, and Fizz Nami. So that's another thing that I might be considering running back. I just built my lineup around decks that I liked, and I knew that, hey, these matchup tables aren't 100% on the same page. They're 65 to 80% there. They really do what I want them to do. I can get through just about any matchup. And if anybody leaves Fizz Nami up, I'm just going to outskill it. Like, I'm going to draw the ban there. And because they've never seen it, they don't know how to play against it. They don't know what it does. And you can have that surprise factor as well. But yeah, I think that's a really good place for a lot of people to start. And like you said, these mastering, these ladder stat tables are important to look at. Like, I'm not saying disregard them altogether. You want to have an idea of what your decks are good into and bad into. But these exact percentages aren't all they're made out to be, right? 52% for Yuumi Pantheon versus SI Freljord, for example, right? FTR gets smashed by Yuumi Pantheon. That is not an accurate matchup statistic, in my opinion. It is more likely a lot closer to 60%, maybe even 65% if played correctly. Now, for FTR player might tell you differently, but most Pantheon players I know are pretty comfortable in that matchup.
Interesting. So,
and that's also being skewed by latest ladder tech, which is the Buried in Ice plus the It That Stares, which people have converted to over Ruination as it destroys Yuumi. So that's maybe something that people can't afford to tech their lists for in tournaments when they're trying to build into a wider field, right?
So what about if like your comfort pick is like not really in the meta like right now? Like you said before with like Fizz Nami, and it's just still like a reasonable deck. Like my deck I had like the most success with, I climbed to like 300 LP, was Misfortune Quinn, and I didn't really feel like playing it this time. but or like if you have like a one guy who is like the one trick deep player who just likes his Nautilus Maokai so much, would you still suggest them to play in a deck they're very comfortable in, or would you say no, this deck just is too bad, just go play something real?
It depends. It really depends. I would say if you can carry a ladder win percentage of over 66% with a deck, you're okay to bring it. That's climbing. That's if you have to carry a minimum of 66% on the ladder to climb with a deck in Masters. If you can do that with a list, you're okay to bring it into seasonal open rounds, because that's like we were saying earlier, seasonal open rounds is effectively a ladder, right?
Right.
You're playing into everything. There's so many players. You can't hard target anything. A soft target is an okay strategy. You can say, yeah, I want my lineup to be good into Panth and also Sundisk, and that's where you might look at aggro, right? But if you can't carry that 66 win percent with your deck, it's not a deck you should be looking at, because it's going to fail into more than it's going to win against. And you also need to be comfortable playing it into any particular matchup. So if it's not something that you've been playing on ladder and doing well with, then can you guarantee that you're going to be able to do well with it in the tournament?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Something like Deep is actually not that poorly positioned this season. It's not great, but it does really well into Scion. It does really well into FTR. And it does okay into some of the other stuff. It's not the best deck. I'm not going to say bring it without a doubt, but if you have jammed 1,000 games of Deep this season and you've jammed 500 games of Deep every other season prior, you'd be a fool not to bring it.
You're only talking about random at this point.
No, actually, random refuses to play Deep.
Oh, he stopped? Oh no, we should get him back onto it.
We tried, actually. We told him, just play Deep, it's not even that bad. He was like, nah.
No.
I'm not going to leak random strat for this seasonal, but he's got some spice.
Okay. I'm excited to see that. He always pulls out the spice for sure.
Okay, and maybe another question. If you have someone who like doesn't play that much, or maybe qualified through the gauntlet, like myself, I only played like 200 games at all, or 100 games at all this season. So what would you recommend them? Just bringing the best lineup, or still sticking to a comfort pick they had before? Or what do you think?
It comes down to person, right? If you are a player that maybe doesn't jam the most games, but you've been playing card games for a while, you kind of understand how the different archetypes work, and like you can pick up a deck relatively easily, then I would suggest that you probably just want to play the 3 good decks lineup and just spend some time scrimming. Especially if you have a group of people that you can scrim with. So in this case, it would be probably either Mono Shurima, Pantheon, Ziggs Talia, or it would be Pantheon, Scion, X. We say there's always 2 or 3 decks that are a step above the rest. In this case, for this season, I believe it's Yume Pantheon, I believe it's Mono Shurima, and I believe it's Scion, with Ziggs Talia and Pirates being kind of close behind. Pirates being an aggro deck doesn't really fit in a lineup like that. But you can kind of go anywhere you want with the double Shurima core, or with the Pantheon Scion core, or with the Pantheon Sundisk core. Those 3 pairings are like really, really good to start your lineup with, and you can slot your comfort deck into the 3rd slot as long as the matchup tables make sense, like we were discussing. So to circle back and actually close the point that Conan asked me about, if you're comfortable putting in some time scrimming, if you like the deck, that's one other thing that's really, really important. Make sure that you don't hate the deck that you're playing. I've had the experience of picking up Lee Sin, trying to pick up Lee Sin, bringing it to a tournament with my teammate. It was a backseat allowed tournament. It was LBR back in the day. It was another team tournament where we would sit in a call together and we'd all discuss the plays. That was the format of the tournament. I had 3 Lee pros behind me. 3 guys that had been playing Lee their entire career.
Okay.
I hated every single minute of that tournament. I wanted to, I was like, I lost every game on Lee because I've never played the deck. And even though they're all behind me telling me what to do, it just didn't work out because we have like one person's like, oh, this is the line I think. And the other person's like, well, this line is good too. And they all had different visions of how the deck wanted to play out. And I'm sitting here going, I don't know. I have no idea how this deck plays. I don't know what I would do here. So I'm listening to one person for one turn, and then I'm listening to the other person for the next turn, and then I'm listening to the third person for the turn after that. And it was a miserable experience because I hated Lee Sin so much. Yeah. And I swore off playing decks that I don't enjoy on that day. And I've been much happier and enjoying Legends of Runeterra career a lot more since.
Yeah.
So play what you like, play what you're like. You don't have to love the deck either. If it's a strong deck and you want to win, play it, right? Definitely play it, but make sure that you are playing it for a reason. And yeah, that's kind of the important thing.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think, putting yourself off comfort when you're making your best of 3 lineup is like the best way for you to tank your win rate. Like, I took Aphelios into this most recent Last Chance Gauntlet and just like instantly went 0-2 on the deck because I only played it for like one evening, and I was like, I had no idea what to do with it, and it's just a bad idea. And I think a lot of people get baited into playing what's popular and what's going to be the best. And, like you were saying, it's the open rounds. There's 124 competitors. People are going to be bringing
1,000.
wacky things. What's up?
1,000.
Said 100.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not 1,000. Oh, sorry. It's 1,024. Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's like, there's no way for you to like truly target anything until you're in the top 32 situation. Right. And so comfort, relying on your experience. And of course, like you were saying, bringing solid, strong decks. Like, I always tell people not to 5-head or 7-head their way into playing the counter lineup, because then you're just going to get blown out by what everyone is actually just normally playing.
Yep.
And you were touched on that with the Serturmond triple aggro or triple control lineup. Like, yeah, you're going to eat the aggro players, but I think the Shurima players are your bigger concern.
Yeah, and I personally think there's going to be more Pantheon Shurima players than there will be aggro players.
For sure. I agree. But, I think that kind of touches on all the points regarding like putting together a best of 3 lineup. It's about comfort, the tables, and not getting overly baited. Is that like a good summary?
I think so.
Yeah, so I think we kind of have been touching on this point while discussing best of 3 lineups. We talked about how wide the field is, but when it comes to the individual games and, you're targeting and banning specific of decks, what sort of strategies and what sort of thoughts do you normally have, when you go into that lobby and you first see your opponent's 3 decks?
So you need to decide if you're gonna how you're lied. So the first thing I do when I get into that ban screen is I actually write everything down when I'm in seasonal open rounds, because it's proven that writing things down physically helps your memorization. And I personally don't use deck trackers. I do sometimes, but most of the time I do a better job of just remembering what's on my screen. Maybe I'm handicapping myself by doing so, but that's how I play, especially in seasonals. So the first thing I do is I pop open all my opponents' lists, and I write down their entire list. At least all the tech cards, anything that's out of the normal, all the spells that I have to play around. Normally I've been playing enough that I know the minions that are in the deck, so I simplify it a little bit for myself. But then from there, I look at how the lineup matches up against mine. I start with my first deck. I go, does it beat their first deck? Yes or no? Does it beat their second deck? Yes or no? Does it beat their third deck? Yes or no? And then I do the same thing for my second and my third deck as well. And then from there, I kind of try and figure out which one is the best ban. Sometimes this is really obvious. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're forced into having to 2-1 your win, right? So in the case that we have up on screen, if we have a deck that wins into the first and then loses into the next 2, and then we have... This would be unfortunate, but then we have a deck that beats the first 2 and loses into the third, and then we have one that loses to the second deck but beats the first and the third. Which one are you going to ban here? I actually don't know.
Second one. Don't you ban the second one?
No, you ban the third one, right?
The third, yeah.
Yeah, you banned the third one in this case.
These lines are getting confusing now. Sorry to all of
I
our
used
listeners.
a bad example. But yeah, this is kind of how I go about it. There are tools out there that can help you with this if you're not completely sure on your matchup tables. You can go to Balco's website. I believe he has the matchup helper as well.
Right.
I think we've taken it off Mastering Runeterra at this point, but it's out there. There is a matchup helper out there that you can find and use to help you. And again, that matchup helper isn't intelligent, so it doesn't recognize that sometimes you just have to 2-1 a certain deck. Right.
Oh.
When you're you also have to consider what your opponent's going to ban. That's something else that a lot of people don't realize. If your opponent bans your most winningest matchup, which they're going to do every single time, right? If you have one deck that stomps all three of theirs, it's gone. It's not going to stick around. You then have to realize, well, shoot, I can only beat my opponent if I beat their third deck twice. I'm going to have to lose the first one and just beat the third deck 2 times. And that's sometimes just the way it goes.
Yeah, I think, especially as an aggro gamer, I think being at the 0-1 spot and is like such a comfort zone. Like you're so frequently going to lose one of your matchups on a triple aggro lineup, and I think you're always looking to 2-0 the second deck. It's kind of scary at times.
Yeah,
yeah.
I want to follow up this question. Because I'm always unsure which deck I should bring first. Let's like actually craft an example. I have like 2 decks banned here, and I have to beat this deck. Like, this is my target. This one is like a losing matchup. This one, both of my decks win against, technically. But like my one deck has like a 55%, and the other one is like a, let's say, 65%. Which one do I queue up first with? What do you say?
Oh, so now we're talking about isn't it just flip a coin?
Yeah, this is just flip a coin, unless you know your opponent. If you know your opponent and you know they're always going to queue with one of the 2 decks first, then you can abuse them, right? But the game theory optimal thing to do is to flip a coin. And this has been debated to death. Drizoth did a stream the other day. You can go watch his VOD. I'm sure it's up there.
Oh, I missed it.
It is pure game theory optimal to flip a coin.
Okay.
The moment you divert from flipping a coin, you become abusable, right?
Right.
Which is why some people will always queue the same deck first, right? They're always going to queue the same deck first. And I know if I've played somebody in a tournament 1,000 times, they're going to play this deck first. Like, there's quite a few players I know will queue Sivir Akshan first. I don't know why they do that, but they do it almost every single time. And actually, I played into one of them the other day, and they swapped it up on me. They queued Sivir Akshan second. I was like, oh, you're learning.
Oh, wow. Get debated.
I flipped the coin. It didn't matter to me because I'm not trying to go out from the game theory optimal play, right? I'm always flipping that coin because it's just what I do at this point, right? Some people have told me that you can let the timer just run out and it will auto-select the deck for you. I think it always picks the left deck, though. Yes. At least that's been my experience.
I noticed that.
So I used to be a left deck picker as well. And then I heard Drizoth say that you just let the timer run out and then like let the game choose for you. And that's what I've been doing because I think roping people in the deck selection is a little BM and that's kind of cute.
Just like you are.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's a good point, just flipping the coin. Maybe as a follow-up on this example where we have it drawn up, let's say they queue up with the losing matchup and they actually win with this one. And I know it doesn't matter because they have to win with both, but would you first queue up with the good one or with the bad one? Like, what type of player are you?
Again, it depends on the person here. I would probably queue the better matchup because I'm in an 0-1 position and I just want to get the mental lead right now. I want to come back. That said, you destroy their mental even more if you win with the worst matchup. So if you're really comfortable, I would say queue whichever matchup you're more comfortable in at this point.
Of course.
That's my go-to. Just play, again, always comes back to comfort. The seasonal I did the best. I went 7-2. It was a comfort lineup. I played Aurelia Azir, I played Reputation, and I played Thresh Gnosis. Or Plunder. It was Plunder. Thresh Gnosis had been nerfed at that point. So that was my best seasonal. And that's not a lineup that most people were on. Everybody else was playing playing Sivir. They were playing Sivir Akshan Ionia. It was Sivir Akshan Ionia at that point. With the Flurry of Fist combo. But I said, no, I don't like that deck. I've been playing Reputation all season. It's what I know. It beats Aurelia Azir, which is what I'm expecting, at least bad Aurelia Azir players. So that's what I went with, and I went 7-2. I just didn't have the seeding, and I kind of haunted my last round, so it was unfortunate, but we'll make top cut this time. I just got to get some scrims in.
I trust in you.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that kind of moves us right into our next point, if you guys are done talking about picking and banning.
Sure.
I mean, like, the thing about picking and banning is that it's like so complicated, right? Because like that's like 80% of the battle when it comes to crafting your lineup anyways, you know? Like, we spent so much time talking about the building your best of 3 lineup, but at the end of the day, when you are thinking about your best of 3 lineup, it's impossible not to think about what you're going to be targeting and what you're going to be banning. And I think right now, in the specific meta that we have for Legends of Runeterra currently, the field is so wide. You know, I saw a top cut breakdown from one of the recent OLS tournaments, the online league series that from the Boulevard posted, and there was just so many decks. I think like the most used deck had like a representation of maybe 4, and I feel like when you're coming into preparing and picking 3, it's like, how do you even target that? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no way for you to target a meta this wide, in my opinion.
I actually don't think that the meta is like. There's a lot of decks that you can play, but I think that you can definitely build your lineup in a way that you are soft targeting Pantheon and MonteXristo, and that would be the aggro slanted lineup, right? I got lost in the sauce. Can you bring me back into focus? I forgot what we were talking about.
We were talking about how difficult it is to target in metas where there's a lot of variability, and especially when you take into account how big the field is going to be for the upcoming open rounds. Just like how targeting is not as effective as just going in and saying, I'm going to ban this.
Right. Right now, while there is a large variety of decks, they all a lot of them do similar things, and a lot of them draw similar matchup tables. Like if we look at the matchup table that we have up in front of us, there's a lot of green in the same area, right? There's a lot of red in the same area. So clearly there's some winners and losers of this deck. The meta right now is particularly polarized, is how we would describe this.
Mm-hmm.
And that just means that there's some decks that are very clearly at the top and some decks that are very clearly at the bottom, and some decks that win very heavily into others, while some decks lose very heavily into those decks on the flip side, of course. So the point that I'm making is that while there is a ton of decks out there that are viable right now, they all beat one thing or they all lose to one thing. And because of that, you can build your lineups pretty effectively. It just means that you have a lot of choice in your lineup building. That's why I can do stuff like playing Ziggs Talia, MonteXristo, or Ziggs Talia, Fizz Nami, and Echozillion, right? Echozillion and Ziggs Talia is like your Shurima core. There's your 2 Shurima decks, and then I just threw in my 3rd deck there, right? And Echozillion is one that the stats are just kind of on, but that's just the way it goes sometimes with certain decks again.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
That makes sense. I just did, yeah.
I think you touched on another point that I wanted to bring up. I keep looping us back into the best of 3 topic, but I think at the end of the day, all of these topics are so interdependent that it's impossible to discuss one of them without discussing the other 2. You mentioned how you just kind of threw in your 3rd deck, and I think that whenever I see people preparing, a lot of stress comes from the fact that they need to bring a 3rd deck, and oftentimes it's really, really difficult to find something that is, 1, good, and 2, matches the tables of your other 2 decks that you're already bringing. So like, how do you kind of get over the 3rd deck syndrome where, you know, and I face this personally as an aggro player, it's almost impossible to bring a 3rd aggro deck that isn't like
somewhat subpar.
Yeah, like pretty close to 50% or worse. Like, there's so many times where I have to play spiders in a meta that's very hostile to spiders.
Yeah, I actually I lost faith in spiders because I brought it in the Ari Cannon season and I didn't find Ari Cannon once. And then when I did find Ari Cannon, spiders just dead drew. And like I said, this is no longer a deck I ever want to play. So I'm currently also struggling to find that third deck for the aggro lineup because I know it's Scion, right? I'm pretty sure Burn Scion is the way for the first one, or maybe it's Scion Rumble, some kind of split there. And then the second one is definitely Pirates. Pirates is obviously a very, very strong deck right now. But what's the third one? Do I play Bandle City Burn? Well, that's not really been toyed with. There's no stats on it. Do I just play Yia? It just got nerfed. It still beats Pantheon. It still beats Disc, but it's a lot closer than it was. What do I put in here? And the answer to that is, again, what am I comfortable playing? What do I know best? And I think in this case, I've been leaning towards Bandle City Burn. I think that people kind of underestimate how strong that deck is right now. I think it is still just fine, even with Nerf Gnar. You just play Teemo. I did this last season when I wanted to play Trundle Timelines in my lineup. I just played Bandle City Burn with Teemo. Teemo fits in with that deck, no problem. I couldn't play Gnar because Gnar was in my Timelines deck, but I needed something, and Bandle City Burn was like solid. So I just put Teemo in. I'm still experimenting with the build. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do personally, if I even want to be on aggro.
Right.
But I think that third deck should be a deck that just lines up with your matchup tables. It doesn't have to be 100% lined up like we talked about multiple times today already. But it does have to be good enough. And it does have to have the same matchup tables, right? If you have a conflicting ban, you're going to put yourself in a really, really tough spot, and it's just going to be really awkward for you.
I've read today, like one of the bigger discords, somebody just said, well, if you don't know which third deck to bring, just bring Sundisk, just bring the best deck, because everybody will just ban it anyways, and you'll be fine. You don't have to play it ever again. That's obviously a bad take, right?
Yes, that's a bad take.
I think it's a bad take, but it's funny. Like,
here's why it's a bad take, though.
Go ahead.
It's a really bad take because if you're ever forced into playing that Sundisk list that you've got zero practice on, you're now SOL. You're so out of luck. It is so bad for you to play a deck that you've not run at all. I've tried bringing decks for ban bait, and it's so bad when you're forced onto it. It just feels terrible.
True.
The only time I brought a deck as pure ban bait because I wasn't confident on it, but it was Twisted Fate Fizz, and I mean, like, that deck was just so strong that like no one was not going to ban it anyways in that tournament.
I got it through a couple times.
But then you probably win on it, even if you're not like super good on the deck. You probably could get wins on it. Like, the deck was just so powerful.
Yeah, TF Fizz was an exception. Even Aurelia Zero to a degree was like kind of close up there to a tier 0 deck. It was like really at its peak anyways.
Yeah.
And like tier 0 decks mean that they just have no bad matchups pretty much. Their worst bad matchup is like 45%. Right. And even then they're like, you just high roll it often enough. Something like TF Fizz was truly a ridiculous freaking deck. Drizzoth was putting up 80% over 100 games. It's crazy. Like that, those numbers are ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. To be fair, Kevor was doing that with Sundisk last patch before the nerfs. Yeah. So maybe there's an argument to be said. Maybe Sundisk was a tier 0 deck as well. I personally don't think so. I think Sundisk had pretty clear counters, but TF Fizz, you could just like, even in your worst matchups, Spiders, for example, if you would have to force them into using Noxian Fervor on your TF on turn 4. Otherwise, your TF would just flip, and then you're in a fantastic spot because you have a flip TF on the board. How do you ever lose?
Right.
That was a crazy deck. Like a crazy deck.
Do you want to add anything? Sorry.
Remember, like, in this meta, like, I don't know if you saw my tweet today, but just imagine this meta back then, and then you see, like, the quote, like, MonteXristo just got nerfed, so I'm now thinking about bringing Talia and Malphite to seasonals, and maybe Ezreal Heimerdinger. It's just like, so crazy to me how you can, like, play all of these random decks and all these random champions now, all of a sudden.
Yeah, if you told me that on Talia release, I would be like, ha, ha, imagine Talia's a playable champion. Good joke.
Yeah, Malphite as a playable champion.
Malphite they buffed pretty quickly, and like honestly, people kind of underrated Malphite Talia for a very long time. I think that deck was moderately fine.
Like, Talia got also buffed, but I was like, I like the actual buff Malphite again. That's true. But like, even if Talia didn't change at all, like I thought I would have to buff her like 4 more times, give her like make it like a 5/5 to be viable at all, or like give her overwhelm all of the time. But just that the meta shifts and she's suddenly good, I guess. It was really surprising to me.
Yeah, I think Shurima got a lot of strong tools.
Quicksand.
Shurima has just been so strong. They were so propped up by their overpowered cards like Merciless Hunter and Ruin Runner. Those got nerfed, and the region was still perfectly fine. But then it got really buffed by the Quicksand change, which I think was fine. Like, I think maybe Quicksand is a little bit strong, but I don't know. I think it's fine for cards to be a little bit powerful. I honestly don't even think that Merciless Hunter needed a nerf. Well, Merciless Hunter might have needed a nerf, but Ruin Runner might not have. One of the two needed a nerf, but I don't think both did at the same time. I think. But then again, I also think it's fine for Riot to just take cards out of the meta for a little bit here and there just by over-nerfing them. Like, we could have 3-2 Fiora back right now, or 3-3 Fiora back right now, if you ask me.
Oh no, 3-1 Fiora. Yeah. I think, 3-3 Fiora would be funny. I think, touching on that, I do appreciate Riot's willingness to just kind of nerf things and get them out of the way, and then revert them. Like, we saw that with the Nasus getting his Fearsome back. Yeah, I think there's some cards like Draven and Fiora that should be reverted, but I feel like Draven is also a very scary card.
Yeah, Draven shouldn't be reverted. Like, I'm glad he isn't like all over the meta anymore. And other decks like Caitlyn or champs like Caitlyn have a chance now. Like, will you play a Caitlyn over like a 3-3 Draven? Probably not, right?
No, because they do pretty different things, right? Draven has the axe generation and enables you to burst discard things, which is super powerful in his archetypes, but it kind of pigeonholes him into more of his archetypes, right? Like, that's why we've seen him removed from Tribeam. Caitlyn's now the one in. Caitlyn always made more sense in that archetype, but you were forced into playing Draven because he was just so much better, being able to be a win condition on his own. Caitlyn is kind of getting there. We might need a couple more Flash Bomb Trap cards for her to actually get there effectively, because right now the only playable one is Piltover Pacemaker. The 2-1 elusive is like close, but 1 HP is really detrimental. Sting Officer, that's what it's called.
Yeah, I Sting Officer is so weak to me. I really feel like that could be a one drop.
What? A 1 mana 2-1 elusive. Are you crazy?
We have a bunch of those.
Well, but not like sticking around.
Yeah, well then I mean just like change it, but I feel like a 2 mana, or then make it a 2 health.
Yeah, this would be fine if they flip the stats on it. I don't think it needs to be 2 attack. This could be a 1/2, and it'd be perfectly like it might even be borderline broken at that point.
True.
It dies to Mystic Shot, so it's trash.
Yeah, just like LeBlanc.
Just like action.
Exactly.
Okay. Maybe we should touch on the last subject of the evening.
Yes.
And that is how you actually prepare for the games themselves and setting up scrims, for example. What are your general thoughts on actually practicing your decks and doing scrims?
So what you should do is you should just go down your friends list and message everybody on it if you want to scrim. This is literally the best way to find scrims. If you don't have friends, join Discord servers. There's plenty of them. Yeah. We can put the link to the Poetry Discord server in the
description.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. I was stumbling.
Also like screaming and coaching and stuff, so you don't have to write poems. You can actually practice with us.
I mean, we would love to see you guys write a poem, of course. But if
there's
you're just looking for people, there's a ton of good players in there. If you're just looking for people to connect with, I'm in there myself. Conan's in there. Wick's in there. We have people like Tiburon in there. We have people like Roji. Yeah. I mean, these people. Rico Rex is pretty active. I think Rico Rex is actually more active in the poetry server than he is in like the other high level competitive servers, which is amazing to me.
Yeah, I've never seen him active anywhere. And then he's like posting deck lists. And then we have like that Katarina one trick with like a million mastery points, and they're always dropping crazy deck lists. I guess like this is just a little plug for the poetry server.
Exactly.
Yeah, but join servers, find people to scrim with, and if you don't know what a scrim is, it just means that you're running your 3v3 lineup into your opponent.
Scrimmage,
right?
Scrimmage practice
Over and over and over again. Find different people playing different things. If you are really uncomfortable in one specific matchup, play that matchup over and over and over again. And while you're playing it, take notes. When I draw this card, I win more often. If I have this on turn 2 to counter that, it's great for me. Like, this is how I prepare personally when I'm really trying to focus and be into my decks and understand how they work in specific matchups. Like, I'm expecting a lot of Pantheon and a lot of Sun Disc, so I should have picked my lineup a week ago. I've been too busy. I haven't put enough thought into it. I haven't been able to play the game as much as I'd like right now, so I'm still kind of scrambling to figure out what I want to be on. But the moment I do, I'm just going to jam that lineup into my teammates over and over and over again. And I'm going to figure out, well, here's how I win the Pantheon matchup with all 3 of my decks. Here's how I win the Sun Disc matchup with all 3 of my decks. And I'm going to have notes, pages of notes saying, if I have this card, it's good. This card is actively bad. This card is best in this situation here. Stuff like that. And that's how I'm going to figure out how I want to play these matchups, which route I want to take to find the victory. So even if it is that 40% matchup like we were talking about earlier, I know that 40% win condition much better than my opponent knows their 60%.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
And maybe another advice is, like if you really struggle with one matchup, I can personally say that back in the TVC meta, I could never like win a game with Thresh Narcissus versus Eternal Lysandra. And what you can also do is with this specific matchup, you can just play the other side of the matchup and see how another good player beats you with their deck. For example, like in the, I can draw this really quickly. Like with Thresh Narcissus, I always played my Thresh and it flipped, and then I attacked and then pulled out a Narcissus. And I never realized that you can, before you do that, actually play out your Narcissus, then attack, and then pull out another Narcissus. And I never did that because I just didn't know it was possible by the rules. And then I played like the other side, and then the other guy did it, and it was like mind-blowing to me how you can actually have 2 Narcissus on the board. And I can recommend that.
Yeah, as somebody who did play a lot of Thresh Narcissus, that was the exact way to win that matchup. You would leverage your 4-3. What you would do is you would set up your board super wide early, and you'd get your early damage in, and then on turn 4, when they open past you, you just take it, and then you throw your Thresh on the board, and then they're like, shit, now I can't cast my Avalanche, otherwise Thresh is flipping. And then you just jam it face, and like, crap, I have to cast the Avalanche because I'm dying. Thresh flips, play a Narcissus, Thresh attacks. The one thing you had to be worried about was a Ruination. But
totally. And
it's a bad matchup.
I never did enough.
Gotta play into it.
Never did enough damage ever to win it. Like, had like a 0% win rate against this deck. And then I was like, aha. And I've won some games at least.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, playing the other side of the matchup super, super important as well. It's important to understand how your opponent wants to win to be able to play around those things, right? There was a really good example of this on Twitter a couple weeks ago. Sir Terman made a tweet where he clipped a game down. He was playing against Moto Shurima, and he basically went to like 5 HP again. Or sorry, he was playing against Moto Shurima. I forget which deck he was on, but he went to like 5 HP, did nothing the whole game basically, and then just OTK'd his opponent pretty much because he just didn't let his opponent flip their champions. The opponent locked their own board with Roiling Sands, and he just took damage, didn't chump block it down, and just waited until he had his win condition in his hand and had his pieces prepared to be able to close out the game.
Mm-hmm. And if you're kind of not prepared, you can also watch other players, like other streamers. But just jamming the same deck over and over doesn't mean you necessarily going to win more. Sometimes you just reinforce more bad habits, so it's also good to take some feedback on it. What I personally do sometimes, not that often I did for last season, is I play the game against myself. So I have like my 2 accounts with full cards, and then I just play both sides of the matchup at the same time. And it's really interesting to see what your opponent's hand is while you do your turn, and what they can actually do, because we often have in your mind, like, if they feel the rush, they will just kill everything I do, and then they will play the big win condition, and there's nothing I can do. When you actually see the hand and see that they don't have everything, they have either the Avalanche or the Withering Veil or something, and then you can get a much better feeling for it. Have you ever done that? Like, play against yourself?
No, I don't have 2 accounts set up to do that, but that is definitely something that you can do, and I know that's something that chess players do quite frequently, as I understand anyways. Yeah. Makes sense then. But yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense. So that way you can figure out, well, they can't always have everything. That's something that a lot of people make a mistake on, myself included. I start playing around everything. Sometimes you just have to pick things you're going to lose to. It's just the way it is. You have to, like, have you ever been in the spot where you can either block 5, you can block to keep yourself above that 4 HP mark against the burn deck and lose your whole board and have no way of winning? Or you can say, I'm just going to lose to decimate. If they have it, they have it. I can't beat it. If I give up my board, I'm just losing a turn later. I need to keep my board to win, right?
Yes.
So that applies even in the earlier stages of the game. You can say, well, if they have Avalanche, I'm always losing here. If they have Withering Wail, I'm always losing here. So I just need to play into it. That said, don't play into it recklessly. I lost a game on ladder last night because my opponent fast passed back, and I was like, well, I can be greedy. It's a ladder player. I'm going to disrespect everything on ladder. And they had Avalanche, and I got absolutely ruined. I lost a free win. They had given me a free win as Nightfall into. I was playing against FTR. If I took the swing, I was winning there, basically on the spot. But I was like, let me disrespect it. It's just ladder. It's a bluff.
LOL.
It wasn't a bluff. It happens.
Totally.
Yeah, I think we touched on a good point in regards to making sure that you're practicing effectively, because repetition doesn't necessarily mean that you are growing, right? Repetition is just a way to solidify habits, and there's a lot of times where bad habits are formed. And I do think that that's what is very important when it comes to preparing for tournaments, is to break away from the ladder mentality a little bit, because like you even just said, you were on ladder, you were disrespecting your opponent, and you can't afford to make those judgment calls in tournament settings because obviously the stakes are higher. And I think getting into practice with good players and scrimmaging against them is the way to make those good habits that are transferable to the tournaments. And when it comes to practicing with players, like you said, you just want to spam people, just message everybody you can. But I think it's also really important to have communication between the people that you're practicing with. If you go into a game and you're trying to learn, and the other player just spends the entire practice time not helping you grow, you're just wasting time at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I actually spent like a good 2 hours playing with Random 7 actually yesterday because he was like, I don't really want to play ladder. And I said, well, I'm at 130 LP. I'm not anymore, by the way. I should be okay. I can play some ladder. I can play some scrims with you. So we spent 2 hours playing. And then it got to the point where I was like, okay, my head's not in this anymore. Like, this has no longer become effective practice. I'm just playing things because of the sake of it. But what I was going with that is, one, like you said, play, of course, till the point where you're still absorbing things and you're still learning. There is a set time limit on how much you can absorb and learn in one session. And two, it's important to be able to ask your practice partner stuff like, what is the worst thing I could do here? What would make you feel really bad? And like, it sounds really unintuitive, right? Because you're asking your opponent, well, what's winning? They don't have to be honest with you. Like, they should be honest with you, but they shouldn't do it in a way that gives away their hand. They can be like, well, if you have the Avalanche in this position, this is probably a good spot to cast it. Stuff like that. You got to be able to tell your practice partners, and you have to be willing to tell your practice partner, like, yeah, it would be really bad if you did this. And that doesn't necessarily give out your hand. You can have you can have the one answer for that. But if you only have one answer in your deck, and that's the only one answer in your deck for that play, you can tell them, like, this would be really punishing in most scenarios. And that helps them learn the matchup as well. And it's really, really important to be able to talk to your opponents while you're playing in these scrimmages. Obviously, don't reveal hands completely. You can play open hand scrims as well. That's a perfectly valid strategy. Like we were talking about earlier, playing against yourself. It's the same thing if you play with your opponent and you're both in Discord with your streams open. And you're willingly playing open-handed like that. People do that all the time in physical card games as well, as I understand. But yeah, it's talk to your practice partner after the game. Be like, hey, was there a point where I could have done something differently, do you think? And they can say, well, when you did this, I was really happy because it let me do this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So maybe I should have done that instead. Yeah, that would have punished me really hard.
Right.
You know, and it comes back again to take notes as you're playing the game.
Totally.
If you can, record your play sessions.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up as well.
I was actually assisting with like a scrim session before, and what I did is like I was in the Discord call and I said both of them just share your screens, and they had like there's one screen there, one screen there, and this was great because I like then shared the recorded the whole screen, and afterwards you could see both of the players' perspectives, and this was really interesting because I talked about it afterwards, and it was like I thought you would have X card here, and when I'm looking at your hand now from this perspective, you just had nothing. And I think this is basically the best strategy, but you have to have like a third person to record this split screen. Otherwise, you can't.
Really cool.
Both hands. But yeah, it's great.
I think that definitely. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in the Wombat server, we usually have multiple people in the call with us, and we're all kind of commenting on, well, maybe you should play the card on the left. Maybe you should play the card in the middle. It's we're not giving away what the card is because both people are in the call at the same time, but we're all commenting on the lines. And if I'm ever unsure, like, what do I do here? I have 5 different opinions that I can bounce off of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I actually was going to bring up the Wombats because, they are one of the longest running Legends of Runeterra. I guess you could call them a team at this point, but, scrimmage group, practice groups,
Scrim group is typically how we prefer to refer to ourselves. We've had a lot of internal debate about this.
Yeah. So the Wobbly Wombats, are a scrimmage group, a practice group of top level Legends of Runeterra players. And you've been a part of that organization for a while. And what are some lessons that you've been able to take away from that sort of organization or being a part of that group of players?
When you're doing VOD review and stuff like that, you have to be objective, of course, right? But you have to look not at individual mistakes. You have to look at why it was a mistake. Was it because it was a game theory perspective, or did you just get punished for making the correct play, right? Did you do something wrong from a game theory perspective? And the biggest example I have of this is within my first couple weeks of joining the Wombats, I was doing a VOD review with Yang about one of my LBR games. And at the time, Ruben Pyle, Aphelios Vi was like the hot deck, right? And that's what I had been playing. And I had a tack token on turn 2, and I had the option to play either Ballistic Bot or Goat. Guess what I played?
What did you play?
I played the Ballistic Bot.
Oh, interesting.
Do you know why that was wrong?
Why?
Because the bot is going to passively generate ignitions and value at any point I slam it down. The Goat can only gain value on an attack token, really, right? Especially in the matchup that I was in as well. The Goat gains immediate value on the attack token. So by delaying that for a turn, there's a chance that I'm never getting a gem out of it. It can just get hit with a Mystic Shot, right? And then it's never getting value. I mean, you can argue that trading for that Mystic Shot is a good spot if you want to open up the way for a Zoe or this or that, but that wasn't the case. In this case, it was bot or Goat. And my thought process is, well, I'll start building the bot. And remember, ambush didn't exist at this point, so building the bot does nothing.
It was just 1 damage a turn.
It's just 1 damage a turn. Getting the Goat down, on the other hand, is going to give me a 3 damage threat, which is probably going to have to be blocked. And it's going to give me a gem, which can then heal this. It can buff the bot itself. Like, the bot is already going to get that +1. It's going to get +2 from the gem.
Right.
Totally. And there's like
so that's
micro decisions to make and to do differently each time. And this is really why I love this Runeterra so much. Would you, as a player who's invested so much time into the game, would you say it's now an easy game, or would you say it's still like a hard game for you?
I struggle all the time. I still feel like I'm terrible, man. Like, I was just having a crisis last night because I'm at 2 LP right now. Remember how I said I was at 130 earlier? I'm at 2. I lost a ton of LP, and I'm super struggling. But
I actually feel the exact same. Like I told you before, but like this is crazy. I was at 140 LP, and I was like, should I stop here? And then I was, okay, I'll do one more, and then I dropped down to 0. Then I tried all day to come back up, and I literally failed. And it was like, oh my god, am I actually bad at this game? This is like, it's just weird. I think. What's your perspective?
Yeah. And it's gotten to the point where like I am struggling to find out how to improve now. I don't think I've plateaued. I do think I still have lots of room to improve, but I don't know where to go from here to how to improve. And I've been trying to like ask my teammates for stuff and help. And I was doing a little bit of VOD review with Trevo last night. Trevo, if you guys don't know, used to play on the Sultans, one of the best teams in Latin America, now has been disbanded, unfortunately. But they were very, very well known for their practice and their scrimmaging. And they were like a menace of a team. Players like Garrett's, Trevo, I forget who else was on that, but it was a menace of a team, and they was super, super scary.
I know Mediv was on there as well.
Yeah.
That was a scary organization for sure. I heard that they actually broke up and joined multiple other organizations and helped build up the sort of scrim environment that they were able to facilitate as Sultans, and then kind of brought that to other teams to strengthen more players. So I think that's kind of like why I wanted to speak about this, because I want more players to just get better. You know what I mean? And scrimming and practicing correctly makes people better.
Yeah, that's a big reason why I started making content as well. I was super keen to help people learn about the stuff that I've learned about. And I think that one thing that people don't talk about enough is that you have to think for yourself. Yes, we can sit here and tell you to do this and that, whatever, but you have to think about why we're telling you these things and then decide if you agree with them. And if you don't, why? And like, you have to obviously have like a valid reason, but that reason, like, that reason could be a number of things. Yeah. It could be any number of things, but it does have to be one that's thought out.
No, fully.
And it's always my tip when like watching content and actually trying to improve. Don't just sit there and watch the stuff. Like that doesn't really help you at all. Like sure, the streamer might say some stuff like this is favorable to this one. But if you just sit there and like maybe even do something else in the background while the stream is running, that's not going to help you. What I do if I actually want to learn a deck and want to improve on a deck, I sit there and when each priority the player gets, I pass and then I think about what would I do here. And then I resume the video and see what they do. And then I pass again and think, was my line better? Was their line better? Why was their line better? Maybe they're just not as good of a player as me. Maybe way better than me. And it's like a 40-minute video takes like 3 hours to watch this way, but you learn way more by watching 3 hours of videos in total. So definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I do similar things when I can and when I have the time.
Yeah, and I think that we've been talking about the importance of writing things down and, sort of making sure that you have the record for yourself. And I think that goes into the games as well. You're also mentioning like just taking the time to be cognizant of every decision that you're making, being, aware of what your opponent's doing and why you need to do what you need to do. I think those all add up to effective practice and contributes to developing those good habits that'll carry you through the 9 rounds of open, because at the end of the day, you're going to be tired and you need to be able to rely on instincts a little bit.
Totally. So maybe if we could split this up into like percentages, how much of each stuff would you do? How much would you just play against other players? How much would you do theory crafting? How much would you maybe play on ladder? Could you like, can you like sort this into like a percentage?
I would say play on ladder should be maybe 5% of your practice. I think playing on ladder is like really good practice for open rounds, but not when you're trying to learn and like fine tune your decks, right? Playing on ladder is going to help you learn how to play into a wide variety of decks. It's going to help you learn how to play for longer periods of time. But it's not really going to help you figure out your matchups specifically because you will start to autopilot on ladder. And that's not necessarily a good thing, as we've talked about. The other thing, so I would say maybe 5% of your time in these last 2 weeks should be spent playing on ladder. Ideally, you should have your ranking set already. I am clearly struggling to do that. But as that's the way it goes sometimes. Even the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. Coming from the poetry server, we use a little bit of poetry. But so I think playing on ladder should be maybe 5% of your time in these last couple of days, even 0%, especially if you've had your ladder rank locked. Playing on scrims, you should just play scrims until you feel that you're no longer playing well in scrims, right? once you've stopped actively participating in your scrim session, just say, you know what, this has been great. I appreciate everything that you've done for me, but clearly I'm autopiloting. Clearly this isn't like great. Do you want to do something else? And at that point, switch to VOD review.
Yeah. Stop playing. As soon as you're not playing like with the right mentality, stop playing, because you're just hurting yourself at that point. Like fully. I fully agree with that.
Okay. I think this is like a good overview. I can't for some reason not try it %. Otherwise it just stops my thing completely. So yeah.
Well.
I think if it's like it doesn't matter. But yeah, I think we got like a good overview here. Anything you want to add in the end? Maybe something I like. If somebody still watches this podcast and says, now I'm so motivated for seasonals, I still want to climb up the ladder really quickly, go to those 130 LP. Like, what is going to be your strategy? What should be my strategy for this last final push tomorrow?
I have no idea. I think I am just probably going to play Fizz Nami because it's what I'm really comfortable on and I know my matchups. But if that fails, I'll probably just start jamming some Pantheon.
Okay, it's just like the best deck because I've tried everything by now. I'm so sad. But maybe just go back to my Scouts deck. It's not like the best in the meta right now, but it's just like what I had, like a 70% win rate before, like before the balance patch. Maybe I just still have the 66% win rate necessary to climb. But yeah. I think we have touched about almost everything. Anything you want to add?
No, I'm good.
Wonderful.
Great.
Wonderful.
So then check out our Discord and our social media. You can find down here our Twitter links, our YouTube, Twitch, whatever channels. We all do some sort of content. And yeah, glad to have you here. And this was a very productive, very informative podcast on a subject I personally still have a lot to improve on. But I feel like I learned a lot here. So thank you for coming and thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. It's been a fantastic podcast.
Well, thanks for joining us, Monty, of course. And we'll try to see everybody next week, hopefully.
Yeah. See you.